Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today we are diving into a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. I have tried to start building an entire other brand around the idea of traveling for business. And so I wanted to kind of create a little bit of a window into what it looks like to travel for work in the apparel industry. And I think there is a conception, or there used to be at least a conception, that this was all extremely glamorous. We were all traveling in our designer clothes with our designer suitcases, and we were, going across the ocean to visit our factories and see these amazing pieces of product be made and touching them and doing all of the handwork ourselves. It is not exactly that glamorous. Some of that is true, but traveling for work, especially in the apparel industry, is extremely, extremely stressful. It can be really hard on your body. It can be really hard on your mental health, on your sleep health. And so I wanted to relay a couple of different stories that I've had throughout the industry as I've been traveling. And one of the first trips that I ever took was with an amazing mentor and manager of mine, my first manager I ever had at Abercrombie and Fitch, Karen Steidel. Karen was traveling a lot for work, and I had voiced at the time that I was really interested in getting the chance to travel with her. Traveling the world was something that was a lifelong goal of mine. I was still very young in my early 20s. And so I hadn't really had the chance to travel abroad a lot. And I knew that there was some advantage and there was some opportunity to be able to do that through my career and through work. And so when I started to kind of watch her travel to different countries, mostly to China and different regions of Asia, it was definitely on my heart as something that I wanted to learn from her and be able to start doing myself. So we started working on a project together. We were manufacturing leather goods through Istanbul, Turkey. And so one of the first trips I actually got to go on, we were struggling to complete the production run of our core line women's Abercrombie and Fitch leather jacket. It was the leather moto jacket. It was kind of going to be one of those high ticket pieces, kind of a staple in all of our flagship stores. So if you've ever been to an Abercrombie flagship store, like if you've been to Paris or New York City or London, they are these huge, huge buildings. Everything inside is just curated perfectly to the Abercrombie brand. Now, I haven't been in one in a really long time, so I'm guessing that things have probably shifted since the 15 years that I have been part of the company. But this piece was really important for us to get right, and we weren't quite nailing the fit. There was something about it we just couldn't get on our fit models when we were in-house. The factory wasn't quite understanding the comments that we were sending in. And so what we ended up doing was jumping on a plane and going over to Istanbul to see if we could correct the issues right there in the factory in rapid time so that we could approve to production on time. And this is typically in the fashion industry and in the apparel industry, the main reason that I see for people traveling. A lot of us are in a time crunch on something. We know we need to launch on time. And if things aren't going exactly according to plan, it's really easy for us to be in-house with the factory who is helping us produce those pieces, helping to work in the sample room to sew the garments so that we can talk to them directly, see the kind of machinery that they're using, make suggestions live, and then see a couple of rapid prototypes instead of waiting for them to quality control check it all, get it all packaged up, ship it in some way that's cost effective for everybody, and then for us to receive it, measure it, prep it, etc. All of that can be done in a couple of days if you're on site, as opposed to doing it over maybe a month of time if you're trying to do everything like kind of the traditional way that we were doing overseas. And so we jumped on a plane we flew in through Paris and then jumped on a smaller plane, which took us to Istanbul. Istanbul is an amazing, beautiful, beautiful city. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be able to visit it at a time that felt really safe. Karen and I were able to take a couple of days near the end of our trip and really be tourists. And we really got to check out a lot of the amazing, beautiful architecture that is in that city. And so this is kind of where I started to get the bug of, number one, not only understanding how important it can be to be in your factory with the manufacturers themselves so that you can rapidly fix problems, you can rapidly develop prototypes, but you also get to put faces to names. And this is something that I don't think we talk about enough. We talk a lot about the process and the actual functionality of why we travel for our work. But above and beyond almost anything else, being able to just be in a room with people that you work with every day, meet them for the first time, see the expression on their face, learn a little bit about their personality, go have meals with them, let them introduce you to the culture, their food traditions, let them take you around town so that you see a little bit what the locals live like. All of that is extremely valuable so that when you head home, now it's not just, someone I'm emailing with and I've never met them before. Now you've met this person, you've created a little bit of a relationship with them. All of a sudden the workflow becomes a little bit easier. You have a little bit of a rapport with each other. And so this is something that I learned right off the bat. I loved that trip. I am so grateful for that trip. But soon after we took it together, I left Abercrombie to go to Fossil. And I only got the chance to travel a couple different times for Fossil, but one of them was to a denim factory in Medellin, Colombia. And every time I mention that I have traveled for work to Medellin, I have a couple of people raise eyebrows at me because it also sounds like an area that you might not want to typically go to. I know my husband at the time was a little bit concerned about me going to Medellin, but I was traveling with someone who was a native Spanish speaker and was able to really show me around the area. He had family from Colombia. And so he was kind of there as someone who could show me around, someone who could bridge the language barrier, and someone who could also teach me a lot about denim. He was our denim R&D expert at Fossil. And so he was helping us not just with choosing fabrics for all of the denim that we were creating, but also all of the wash techniques that we were utilizing while we were there. So my trip to Medellin was very different. We're going all the way from like leathers and learning how to deal with that type of a fabric, if you will, although in the industry, we kind of call that a non-woven. It's not technically considered a fabric. All the way to figuring out how to wash denim, how to cut denim. They were manufacturing their own denim. So watching all of the weaving machines, that was the first time I had actually seen weaving machines, and just the noise in the room when you're in a weaving mill is tremendous. Like, you actually should be wearing ear protection when you're in a weaving mill because of how loud all of the machines are. It's something you can't really understand unless you're in the room. It's even hard for me to describe, but that was definitely such a cool experience for me. And then getting the opportunity to be a part of that culture for a little bit. I was very adamant with everybody down there that I wanted to eat the kind of food that they eat every day and go to restaurants that they would typically go to for lunch. I didn't want them to bring in, Americanized food. I wanted to immerse myself a little bit in their culture. And I think they thought I was a little bit funny. That's one of the things that I love about being able to travel the world and do it through my work. So that was the second trip that I was able to take for work. And then when I moved to Colorado, there was a lot more opportunity for me to start traveling to a variety of places as I was kind of growing throughout my career, especially now that I was able to prove that I had been to different countries, that I had been to different factories. Karen was an amazing teacher when we took that first trip to Istanbul on kind of quietly showing me what to look for when you're going into a factory. One of the biggest giveaways when you walk into an apparel factory is how clean is their floor, which is something that you might not typically pay attention to, but the best factories in their world are really paying attention to productivity in ways that you wouldn't expect. So instead of them trying to figure out how many pieces can I get onto the line, they're also considering how effective it is to make sure that all of the scraps that end up after cutting fabrics or cutting threads or having trims all over the place, if all of those scraps are also picked up and people can move around the factory in a very efficient way, that is a huge productivity booster. And so the best factories in the world, when you walk into them, will have clean floors. They won't have scraps on the floor. There will be bins everywhere where they've been throwing away their scraps. There are methods for them to be able to throw away threads as they're throwing and as they're sewing, and then clipping and throwing away threads. So that is definitely a dead giveaway. And that was something that Karen started to instill in me from my very first trip. So even when I started to travel a little bit more, I already had some knowledge about what I was looking for. I already had some ways of being able to lend value by putting me on a plane and getting me over to a factory to kind of work on a project. So through Pearl Izumi, for the most part, when I was in Colorado, I traveled quite a bit to China. One of my favorite factories that I have probably ever worked with, the quality, the standards, the methods, the processes that they have in place, not just for production, but also for sampling, and then for like raising their sustainability efforts year after year after year. This is a factory that's constantly growing, constantly trying to evolve, constantly trying to better themselves, constantly trying to offer more and more to their clients. I got the opportunity to travel to visit them. It was probably twice a year for a little while. And that was a really good opportunity for me to be able to get into a region that a lot of people really understand how to travel to. At the same time with Pearl, I was able to travel to Vietnam. I traveled to Bangkok, and through some of those trips, I was also learning about glove manufacturing, which is very similar to apparel. But when you think about having to sew a glove and how teeny tiny all of the little seam allowances are so that you don't get a bunch of, extra threads or extra fabric on the inside to irritate your hands, that was a really, really interesting experience in Vietnam. When we were traveling to Bangkok, we were actually doing engineered knits. So if you've ever seen, I'm trying to think of a good example here. If you've ever seen like a Nike tech tee that kind of has like a pattern woven into it and it looks like the fabric is different in different areas, that is typically a engineered knit. And so what they're doing in those instances is instead of buying like a bolt of fabric and then cutting it on a table and creating a t-shirt out of that, they are actually putting on a knitting machine like just yarns that are then woven in a very specific way to create all of these different textures on the fabric. And then when that piece comes out, it's ready to just cut into a t-shirt shape. So that is detailed work that I had never really had the experience of doing before. But when we were at Pearl, we were doing some run pieces and we were trying to do engineered knits. And when we were in Bangkok, that's what we were working on a lot. And that was a huge experience to see how those machines worked and to understand how intricate and detailed you need to be on your pattern making skills to make sure that you're not wasting a ton of yarns. So if you imagine like, let's say a long sleeve t-shirt, and if you're not utilizing the fabric in the best way and you can't get a lot of pieces out of the fabric that's being knit, you're going to end up with either a lot of waste or you're going to end up with pieces that don't fit quite right because you're trying to just make them fit onto the fabric. And so there's a fine balance between the technical design part of an engineered knit, getting it to fit the body just right, along with the pattern engineering and the marker engineering side of an engineered knit, trying to get it to also fit on the fabric so that you're utilizing it properly. Anyway, that was what we were doing in Bangkok. And when I got recruited to go to Specialized, that was when I was able to start expanding some of my travel into Mexico. I had done a trip before with Miller International when I was with them doing rodeo gear. I had traveled to Torreon, Mexico. And that was a very, very cool experience, being able to be in that area and in that region, which is such like a denim hub of Mexico. But now we traveled to Jalapa with a coworker of mine, and we were making cycling bib shorts down in Jalapa, Mexico. And that was one of the most interesting factory experiences I think I've ever had. Not only were they making cycling bib shorts and cycling jerseys, but they were basically a mattress manufacturer. They were kind of over in the majority of the factory. They were making mattress covers and sheets, and they were building out all of these different mattresses. And then kind of over in the corner, we were working on all of this cycling gear. So it was definitely a labor of love of that factory owner who had this like this mattress factory, and then just really wanted to be part of the cycling scene. So that's kind of how that one worked out. I also got to start to travel a lot more to Europe. And this is where I learned a ton about the northern region of Italy, making really high-end cycling gear in that area, not just the fabrics that we were able to research in like the Lake Como area. We had a couple of different factories in Treviso, which is just north of Venice. And then we were also doing some manufacturing in the Verona area, which is mostly known for its wine and for being part of Romeo and Juliet. So I got to know that area very well. I got to travel there quite a bit, which was always such a pleasure. Like, who wouldn't want to go to northern Italy to travel for work all the time? The food there is amazing. The hospitality there is amazing. The Prosecco there is amazing. The cappuccinos there are amazing. And we had a hub office in Milan. So we would also get the chance to visit the office there, and they would host us and take us around Milan. And it was just such an amazing experience to be able to do that. One of the toughest trips that I've ever been on, unfortunately, for better or worse, was actually planned by me. When I was the development manager at Specialized, I put together a trip right after I got my promotion. I was trying to make sure that I spent some time in all of our key factories and allowed them to understand what my new role was, how I wanted to curate our partnerships, and how I wanted to represent Specialized as a brand as a new manager. And so we ended up doing, I think it was 5 or 6 different cities in a week. I don't love to travel for really long periods of time. There are some people who like to go for work travel for, let's say we're going to do 4 weeks and we're going to hit up 4 different factories and we're going to be a week in each factory. I just personally don't love to be away from home for that long. I prefer to be able to get in and out within 2 weeks or less. 10 days is actually my ideal. If I can get on a trip, get myself overseas, be there for 10 days, and then make my way home, that to me is pretty ideal. And so I crammed a lot of work into this 10-day trip. I actually think this ended up being 2 weeks because we couldn't do it all in just 10 days. But we started in Shanghai, China, where we were working on gloves. And then we made our way down to Heshan, China through Hong Kong. And that was where that's where the factory that I had mentioned before in China, the one that is just constantly innovating, that's where they're based out of. And so I was very familiar with the area. We were able to get in and out of that one pretty quickly because I know it so well and I already knew it so well. But then we had a day off in Hong Kong. So the 3 of us who went together were able to kind of explore Hong Kong a little bit, get some Hong Kong food, which is spectacular. Some of the best food I've ever had. We were able to just kind of do some fun shopping and have some time together in Hong Kong. And then we made our way down to Vietnam, where we were producing a different batch of apparel. And then we made our way over to Indonesia, which I had never been to before, but we flew through Jakarta. We had another glove manufacturer who was doing a different set of gloves for us. When we were in Shanghai, we were working more on like winter gloves, so padded gloves, and you think of like ski gloves almost, but for cycling. And then when we were in Indonesia, that was more like true road cycling gloves that have like leather palms, and they're more for protection, and like they're really tight fitting, and they're made with totally different types of fabrics. So after we were in Indonesia for a few days, we actually then chose to end our trip with a few days on Bali together. And that was just such a bucket list trip. Like, we stayed at this yoga retreat resort where, as long as you were staying on the resort, which we were able to get into, you could go to free yoga classes throughout the day. They had this beautiful pool. Some of the best fish tacos I think I've ever had in my life were there. They made these amazing berry smoothies. Like, could talk about that trip all day. But one thing that I just really want to mention about that is it burnt us out really fast. The 3 of us who were traveling, we were on a plane every other day. And when we weren't on a plane on a certain day, we had something massive planned. So it was either a big day with our team at a factory, or it was a big tourist day. Like only that last couple of days when we were on Bali did we really get a chance to slow down. And if you're a manager out there at an apparel company and you're planning trips for your team, well, I think it's great to be able to work in a couple of days to get to know each other and want to be home, within a certain amount of time. I would say slowing down just a little bit is some good advice that I can lend to you from experience. It is really hard to do that many cities, do that many busy days, that many big, important days in such a short amount of time. If you need to, maybe make 2 different trips. I know that kind of can be hard too because you're going back and forth a lot. But that is definitely a trip that I kind of look back on and go, oh, I think I might have tortured my team on that one. The other message that I'd really like to say about traveling for work, we get asked sometimes to travel for work the day before. Sometimes there's a project or a problem that needs to be fixed immediately. And so you're sitting at your desk, working through a tech pack or building a bill of materials, and your manager will come up to your desk and say, we have this problem. We need you to go solve it. Can you be on a plane tomorrow? And that sounds insane, but that happens more than you would think because all of a sudden something just needs to be fixed and they need someone to be boots on the ground to make it happen. And if you've been traveling a lot of times you can get nominated for it just because you have the experience, you have the know-how, you have the kind of travel etiquette, and you know what it's like to go into a factory, be respectful, be able to do your job professionally, and be able to get the work done. So that can be really tough. Number one, understanding how to pack for a work trip is very different from traveling for a personal reason, like going to a beach vacation or going to a resort and knowing that you're just going to be relaxing and you can be in relaxed clothes the whole time is very different from having to pack and bring all of your business casual clothes so that you can show up to your factories and you can show up to dinners and you can show up to events looking professional and put together. That is a very different skill for sure. I have learned to pack carry-ons only. One of the trips that I went to, we were flying straight to Vietnam and then we were heading to South Korea only a couple of days later. And we lost all of our checked luggage. There were 3 of us on that trip. And when we arrived in Vietnam, none of our suitcases were with us. And so we ended up having to go shopping in Vietnam to find clothes to wear just for a few days while they were searching for our bags. And something about shopping for women's clothes specifically in an Asian country is that we are very different sizes as Americans. We are quite a bit bigger than a lot of the women who reside in those countries locally. So it was really hard for us to find apparel while we were over there. I no longer check bags when I travel for work, no matter what. I make sure I carry everything on so that I have my clothes with me. We were really lucky on that trip that we were actually able to receive our bags. They got delivered to the hotel like the night before we were head to South Korea. And so that one was a really close call. And we ended up all kind of wearing these oversized men's clothes for a couple of days while we were there. It was even hard to find like socks and underwear so that would fit us that we could wear for the next few days. We managed to do it, but it ended up taking up an entire morning figuring out how to get us clothes. I would also say to be really careful and just really aware of where your boundaries are when it comes to travel. I ended up turning down a couple of different trips because companies wanted me to go to places I was uncomfortable going by myself, and they weren't willing to send a coworker or a partner with me. Not to say that if I had decided to go by myself that something would have happened, but my husband and I just weren't comfortable with the situation, and I had the wherewithal and the boundaries to be able to say no. And I don't regret that for a minute, because if something had happened, and I had gone against our instincts that it wasn't the right thing, I think we really would have regretted that. Also, when it comes to boundaries, just really know how often it is that your body is comfortable traveling. In 2018, I was traveling a ton, and I did 14 different trips that year. And I think the shortest trip was a 3-day trip that I did. So if you imagine traveling once or twice every single month for at least a week, I felt like I was never home. I think I made it about halfway through the year. It was July. I had just made it home from a trip. My husband and I were sitting in like a little sandwich shop getting lunch together somewhere. And I just started crying. I was just tired. I was exhausted. The jet lag was for real. And I just couldn't handle it. I was tired. I just wanted to be home. I missed him. And I knew I was actually getting ready to head out on another plane in just another couple of weeks. And so knowing where and when to say no is also, I think, really good for you to understand. And sometimes we don't know where that line is until we've crossed it. But I can probably advise you that 14 trips in a single year might be a lot unless you're really dedicated to doing that type of work. There are some people who travel constantly all the time. They are genuinely never home, not just feeling like they're never home. And they love it and they thrive on that. And if that is you and you don't have boundaries around how often you can or want to travel, then don't set them. That's totally your prerogative. But if you are someone who likes to be home with your family and someone who knows that, constantly being back and forth can be hard on your body, it can be hard on your emotions, definitely knowing that and sticking up for yourself and saying no when it's right to say no is okay. If you've been asked to travel for work by your manager and this is your first time going, just have so much fun. Try to find a way to incorporate some touristy things, figure out how to get some local meals, get some good local food in you, and really just be respectful of the culture that you're going to. I really recommend that you learn just a little bit of a language, even if it's just hello, goodbye, and thank you. Those 3 phrases in a local language are going to get you a lot farther than you think. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I love talking about travel. If you're interested in chatting about it with me or asking any questions, you can always comment on this podcast or you can contact me at unmarkstreet.com. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, unmarkstreet.com, where I do weekly trainings through my video channel, a monthly newsletter, and offer so many resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand.